Now, I look to Professor Steve Fuller to propose his case.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank the previous speaker for completely muddying his case, because most of what he said seemed to be, in fact, against big tech. Let me just remind you of a couple of things, because I think DP, who began the whole debate, in fact, laid out a kind of benchmark, which I think we need to examine more critically. So he said, one of the things he said, which I want you to ponder on, is that humanity is in a better place than it was 20 years ago. Most of you weren't here 20 years ago. Okay? So, and this is a really important point, because in a sense, all of you are digital natives. You are all already part of the big tech world. So you don't actually have a sort of clear basis for comparison. Okay? And I think in this respect, whatever intuitive judgments you have about this matter, you need to be self-critical, because you have not lived throughout all of history. The first speaker, it did. And so this is where I think it's really important that you, in a sense, what is the benchmark here of humanity? Because this is what we're arguing for here, right? We are saying that big tech threatens the survival of humanity. Okay, so what is humanity anyway? Okay, I'm sure you have some ideas about this. But the key thing that I think is really important about how big tech has transformed our understanding of humanity is, let's take something pretty basic that I think we take for granted, is the breakdown of the life-work distinction. Okay? As a result of big tech, the fact that we're always on the internet, day in, day out, there's no real difference between, leisure and work and all of that kind of stuff. And certainly as a result of COVID, we've been even more encouraged to think this way. Because I think in the way this proposition was originally phrased, right, we were thinking, maybe COVID gives us a different way of thinking about this. But in fact, COVID is just, as it were, reinforcing the kind of trajectory that we're on, whereby we don't actually have any, our sense of humanity is basically producing stuff for Google, for Amazon, right? So yes, we get goods, but what they make money off of is being able to track all of our behavior online, all right? And so, the only thing, in a sense, that prevents this situation from becoming something like China's social credit system, okay, which I think the gentleman back here was alluding to, if you remember in the beginning when he raised a point of order against DP, right, is the fact that in the Western countries, right, we don't have this merger of the state and corporate sector. And so, in a sense, one of the positive features, you might say, about the fact that it's so hard to get taxes out of Google is the fact that they're not in lock sync with the state. Whereas in China, all of these big companies like Baidu and Weibo and Alibaba and all the rest of them that DP pointed out to, that indeed do have more subscribers than the ones in the West, they're in cahoots with the state. Okay? And that is where big tech can take us. Okay? It hasn't happened yet. And that's because we do live in a kind of liberal capitalist political economy still. But it could go in that direction, especially as we become more security conscious over the next decades. I can easily see a kind of merger taking place, okay? And this will have been made possible because we have big tech. If we actually had many more different kinds of tech corporations, right, if we had a breakdown of this kind of monopoly structure, it would be much harder to do. But we effectively have a monopoly structure. And for those of you who are familiar with what's going on in the United States today with regard to these matters, which the first speaker was alluding to here, right? We have a very remarkable phenomena, because as you know, the United States is an incredibly politically polarized country at the moment, right, between the left and the right. But the left and the right agree on this, right? So in the past year, there have been 2 best-selling books published in the United States, one by Democratic Senator of Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, one by Republican Senator of Missouri, Josh Hawley, that are basically banging the drum for antitrust legislation to be raised against big tech. Okay? That should tell you something. This is one of the few issues in the United States, the most polarized democratic country in the world, that they can agree on. That should make you think that there's a real problem here. And it is an existential problem, okay? Insofar as already your behavior has been so much conditioned by this, okay? But the point is, people do see the problem, right? And it's a serious problem. And let me say something also. So my background, my coming into this, I am not an antitrust lawyer, okay? I am someone who comes from the sociology of knowledge and the history and philosophy of science. And one of the things that we see, right, that has been in fact a really damaging feature of the history of knowledge production has been path dependency. Right? This is a term that comes from economics and is usually talked about in the context of technology, whereas it were the first innovation that manages to hit the market in a big way ends up dominating all of the subsequent development, and all of the other competitors, even if in principle they would have been better had they been pursued, are eliminated. They're even erased from history sometimes. Okay? This happens in the history of knowledge, not just the history of technology. All kinds of theories disappear. All kinds of views disappear. They may get rediscovered 200 years later, right, by historians. And by the way, for those of you who do pursue history, this is the value of history, is to pursue those lost opportunities. We are living through a period where path dependency, in the way in which knowledge is primarily transferred to people and produced by people today, the media by which they do it, the platforms by which they do it, it is path dependent in a really big way, and you're all buying into it. You're making the same mistakes of the past. And so this is where, especially you younger people, yes, it's easy. Yes, it's convenient. What are you losing? What are you losing in the process? And luckily, there are legislators, right? And there are people who realize that the problem is here. But sometimes what the real problem is what you take for granted and find convenient. And I'll stop there.